In June 2019, my family took a 7-day cruise to Alaska on the Disney Wonder. During my planning, out of all the days on the trip, one stood out, and that was the day the ship goes to Endicott Arm. It's an unusual day because the ship doesn't stop at any port, and neither is it technically a sea day. You travel down a long fjord to see a glacier at the very end. The only excursion you can take is the official Glacier Explorer Tour. If you want to see the glacier up close, you must take this Disney port adventure. Here's the official information page from Disney Cruise Line, and I'll include a link to this in the description below. Before the trip, I didn't know much about Dawes Glacier and Endicott Arm. I didn't know what to expect, and a lot of information I found online was a bit cryptic and vague, and there were lots of mixed reviews. So I thought I'd give you a full walkthrough from the beginning to the end of my whole trip and a review of what to expect. The whole experience runs for about 3 hours, and in 2019 it cost $260 for ages 10 and up, and $185 for children under the age of 10. It's not cheap, but that's because they have very limited availability. It really is supply and demand. There's only 2 excursion times and only 2 boats per excursion. So if you want to book this port adventure, do it quickly, right after your booking window opens, because it does sell out, especially that early tour, and I'll talk more about why a bit later. The first thing to know is that there are 2 different tour times you can book. There's an early slot around noon and a second slot around 2 to 3 p.m. Both tours meet in the same place on the ship, usually one of the lounges, and you'll be on the same boats, but there are some differences in how you'll experience the glacier and the fjord between those 2 different time slots. The early tour gets on the boat very early in the fjord. On the actual day, the Disney Wonder will turn into Endicott Arm in the late morning. You'll see on the left side of the map, there's this wide bay, and that's more or less where you get on the small boats if you're on the early tour. Then, those early tour boats zoom way ahead of the ship, and you get these beautiful, uninterrupted views of the fjord, and after a while, the Disney Wonder will catch up to you at the glacier. On the second tour, you board the boats after the Disney Wonder has already reached the glacier. So you spend more time at the glacier itself, but you don't get that ride where the scenery opens up to the glacier. You experience that back on the main ship. Since my family took the early tour, I'll do a walkthrough of our experience, so keep in mind it was that early tour. Again, we boarded the boat early in the fjord. The boats are medium-sized. They have 3 floors. The lowest is all indoor seating with a bar and the bathrooms at the back. At the bar you can buy limited snacks and drinks, and they'll have a few free snacks. The middle floor is half indoor seating and half an outdoor area that has no seats, and it's open at all times for you to walk around and take photographs. And then they have a very top floor, and it's closed off unless the boat is completely stopped. They do have nice bathrooms and comfortable indoor seats, and the inside is heated and warm, and they will also give you blankets and binoculars for your use on the boat, which is really nice. We definitely use both the blankets and the binoculars. Usually the boats immediately head for the glacier on that early tour, but we were really lucky on our trip because our captain had spotted a group of humpback whales. So he zoomed behind the Disney Wonder to go chase the whales. And that is something very special about this tour. As opposed to staying on the big boat, if you're on the small boats, the crew will make sure you get to see the wildlife if it's there. They go out of your way for you to get close to it, and the tour is really flexible like that. On our trip, we watched whales for a good 15-20 minutes, which was amazing. We were able to get really close to the whales, really great photos. If you watched my sled dog review, you'll know we saw so many whales on the glacier tour, we actually canceled our Juneau whale watching and booked sled dogs instead. After the whales, the captain turned us toward the glacier, and we passed the other tour boat that goes out at the same time, and we got a great view of the Disney Wonder. Really, really stunning scenery, really fun to see the ship from a distance. We were there on a cloudy day, and it was raining a little bit, but the views were still really nice. Lots of mountains and waterfalls and trees, little icebergs. The technical word for them is bergy bits, which I love. And of course, the wildlife. Our crew told us we were really lucky, and we saw every type of wildlife you can see in Alaska except for wild goats. We didn't see wild goats, but we saw whales and seals, bald eagles, and the highlight was a bear and her 2 cubs. Our captain actually stopped the boat and let us watch them for a while, climbing up the side of the sheer mountain. The cubs were keeping up with the mother bear, and we just pulled over and watched the bears climb up the mountain until they were completely out of sight. And the captain pulled back out into the fjord and we headed toward the glacier. One of my favorite moments was when the captain pulled the boat over to this huge, gorgeous, rushing waterfall. I think one of the burning questions people ask about this tour is, why should I pay all of that money to take a tour when the Disney Wonder sails down the same passage and sees the same scenery and the same glacier? And the answer is proximity. You just can't get very close to the action when you're on the big ship. Here's a photo of the Wonder sailing in the passage. And yes, the scenery is stunning. You can see the ship passing a waterfall, which is gorgeous, but notice how far off in the distance it is. When you're on the small boats, you're able to get right up next to some of the wildlife and the waterfalls. Here's a video showing just how close we got to some of the waterfalls. You could smell the water and feel the spray. If you're on one of the early boats, you also get an incredible sense of anticipation as you get closer and closer to the glacier. There's nothing and no one in front of you. The scenery is pristine, nothing to interrupt your view. In our boat, I could feel the excitement building as we rounded the corner, and there was the glacier. This is a good moment to stop also and mention those Berkey bits, those little icebergs in the water. For background, I love ice. I adore icebergs. But I've been to Antarctica and I've seen ice. I've seen incredible icebergs and more Berkey bits than I can count. So I have to admit I had low expectations for ice on the tour, and I really wanted to see ice in the water, but I was worried it couldn't compete with Antarctica. But I was pleasantly surprised. There was a lot of ice and it was beautiful. You start to see it pretty early on in the fjord, and by the time you reach the glacier, the water is full of the stuff. This is the main reason the Disney Wonder can't get very close to the glacier. If you stay on the big ship, you can only see the glacier from a very safe distance because some of those icebergs are really big. Here's a picture of our ship, and this is the closest the Wonder got to the glacier. I'm taking the photo on the boat right next to the glacier, looking back at the cruise ship. So yes, that is the reason you book the Glacier Explorer Tour. If you want to get as close as possible to the glacier for the best possible views, you have to take the tour. And one more fun fact before I stop talking about the little icebergs. One thing I didn't know is that they'd be covered in seals. When we were there in June, it was breeding season. So there were hundreds of the seals by the glacier. They were everywhere. They were all over the icebergs. If you squint, you can see the little dots on the icebergs. Those are the seals. It was amazing, and the babies were really cute. So moving on to the glacier itself, yes, it's very pretty. If you've never seen a glacier before, it's definitely worth getting close to one. If you've seen lots of glaciers, I think Dawes Glacier won't disappoint you. I did think it was really pretty. As you can see, if you look at the bottom right of the photo, the tour boats do get very close. The tour also provides those binoculars, so you can look at the ice much closer if you want. There's also waterfalls and wildlife next to the glacier. On our tour, most people went to the top decks at least once to get the best view. But it was pretty cold, so keep that in mind. But don't worry, the views from the lower decks are really nice as well. If you're into photography at all, I strongly recommend bringing a telephoto lens. You can get stunning photos of that blue ice in the glacier if you zoom in. Don't forget to take close-ups and detail shots as well as landscape photos. The valley and the ice are beautiful. Unfortunately, on our trip, we did not experience white thunder, which is the sound of the ice breaking off and crashing into the water. But the second tour group said it happened on their tour, so watch out for that. And do know if you stay back on the ship, that's something you won't be able to experience. The Disney Wonder will just be too far away. After about half an hour at the glacier, our captain turned the boat around and we went back through the fjord to the Disney Wonder. One fun thing that the crew does during the return trip is scoop out a big chunk of glacier ice from the water. Then they chop it up and they'll sell you a cocktail with that glacier ice. And of course, we had to buy one because, I mean, how often do you get to drink cocktails with ice from thousands of years ago? It was really tasty and they didn't skimp on the alcohol, so I do recommend that cocktail. Our return to the ship was really magical. I didn't expect to enjoy the approach as much as I did, but the Disney Wonder grew larger and larger, and it was a great opportunity for photos. And then, much to our happy surprise, who was on deck when we arrived? Mickey Mouse! In his Alaska outfit, just waving his little heart out and giving us 2 thumbs up. What a fun ending to a great adventure. We swung around the Wonder and got one final glimpse of the glacier before the boat pulled up alongside the ship to disembark. So of course, the big question is, should you do it? I say yes. I had a wonderful time and I highly recommend this port adventure, with some tips to make your trip a little bit easier. First, make sure you plan around meal times. If you book the early slot, the noon one, you'll obviously miss lunch. So plan your meals in advance. Maybe eat a late breakfast, bring snacks, especially if you're bringing young kids on the excursion. And this is your friendly reminder, in Alaska, you cannot take any fresh foods like apples or bananas, anything not in a package, you cannot take it off the big ship. The excursion boats do offer those free snacks, but they're really small and sugary. And you can buy some snacks at the bar, but I would not rely on that as a meal replacement. The second tour also interferes with the meal, which is dinner. Our server at dinner the night before had warned us that that second excursion often misses dinner. We shared a dining table with a family who had booked the second excursion. They did make our dinner that night, but they were maybe half an hour to 45 minutes late, and they were huffing and puffing because they had run to catch dinner. Next, bring warm clothes. The boats get pretty cold, especially when you're moving fast and you get close to the glacier. If you want to spend any time above deck, bring very warm clothes. I'm talking hat, scarf, gloves, everything. Even if it's the peak of summer, even if it's been warm in ports before this, these boats do get cold. Also, prepare for rain. It definitely rained on us during our trip, and that's apparently normal. So bring waterproof gear, and don't forget a plastic bag for your nice camera if you want to stay above deck. A lot of people with really nice SLRs had to retreat below deck when it started raining on our boat because they didn't think about how to protect their equipment in the rain. Another biggie, this one for parents, think about your child's limits when it comes to long boat trips. We brought a 3-year-old on the trip. She's really adventurous and well-behaved, and it was mostly fine, but our experience was more limited than other people on the boat. She couldn't really stay above deck very long without getting very cold, and her attention started to drift after a couple of hours. We were smart enough to have brought an iPad with us, so she was entertained and she didn't bother anyone. But at least one of us had to stay below deck with her at all times, while a lot of the action was up on that top deck. If you have an active child who might get bored, consider saving the money and leaving them safely on the big ship in the kids club. That said, there were a lot of kids on board who were fascinated by the whales and the ice and the seals. Every kid is different, so consider your kid's interests and limits before booking. My final tip is to book that early tour. You have a much more exciting approach to the glacier, and you get to see the landscape completely uninterrupted. Also, most of the wildlife we saw was during that long ride up to the glacier, and not at the glacier itself. Also, this is a personal choice, but if I have to miss a meal on a Disney ship, I always prefer to skip lunch rather than one of the special themed dinners. But again, if you can't get the early tour, it's okay. I would still book it. I really did enjoy this port adventure, and I do think it's worth the price. And that's my review of the Glacier Explorer Tour in the Disney Wonder. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below, and good luck with your trip.